Hey, it's Carrie.
And Ashley.
We welcome you to the Self Care Cafe. We are both health professionals and moms and nature lovers and food lovers and love helping women get over dieting and just start living. We think that talking about bodies and perfect bodies and dieting is just boring.
Did we put you to sleep there, Carrie?
Yes. So if you are ready to ditch dieting and get to living and talk about more important things, then you are in the right place. We don't put shame and guilt on the menu here. You don't even have to tip us.
Nope.
Come hang with us. The advice is free. We want to have a bunch of girlfriends to just hang out with and get real with, and it's time to start living, ladies.
Hey, Carrie.
Hey, Ashley. All together now.
That's right.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good.
Awesome.
So, what is on the menu for today?
So today is our second part of our little series that we're doing. And remember, we've broken down kind of the intuitive eating framework into what Carrie and I like to look at into like 3 phases. So the first phase is breaking up with dieting. And last time, so episode 27, we talked about the first principle of intuitive eating, which is rejecting the diet mentality. So today, we're tackling the second principle of intuitive eating, which is honoring your hunger.
This is really important. What does that mean?
What does that mean? I like that question because I feel like hunger has gotten this really complicated story with it.
And a bad rap, right?
Yes,
Like we're almost
exactly.
like feel uh guilty that we feel hungry, like I'm not supposed to feel hungry.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
so silly. Like, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess honoring your hunger to me is kind of like learning what hunger feels like in your body, and it might
Mhm.
feel a bunch of different ways, and then responding to it in a way that is helping your body, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yes. So responding to it like in an appropriate manner,
Yes.
depending on
Depending on
like
all the factors we're going to talk about today.
yes. Because not all hunger is created equal,
Exactly.
right? There's different kinds of hunger.
Mhm.
Um, but so okay, but before we get into that, so why should I honor my
Why?
hunger?
So, hunger's super important, like you said a few minutes ago, because it's our body's way of telling us that it needs something.
Mm,
And we have a lot of different signals that our body tells us when it needs us to do something, like going to the bathroom, for example. And I really like comparing hunger to using the restroom because it's very similar. It's like
because
we
everyone
can,
does it.
right. And also, it's like this basic need for our body.
Mm,
And with going to the bathroom, we might have to put it off for a little bit if we're like in the middle of a meeting or task or whatever. But
delivery food.
we're gonna do it. Like
Mhm.
we can't ignore it too long. But with hunger, I feel like we've all gotten that complicated story, like we mentioned earlier. Hunger's got that bad rap, and we do try to ignore it and avoid it. And that just leads us down this path of so many different variables. But when we ignore it and avoid it, our body's not getting the things it needs, and it does a lot of stuff to our body. So, ignoring hunger or restricting food, they're kind of very similar. Um, we're going against our body's like biological needs
Mm,
and survival cues and mechanisms. And almost always it leads to like overeating or binge eating at some point. And I don't really love the word overeating, but maybe a better one is like eating past comfortable fullness. We'll
mhm.
talk about fullness in a different one.
Yep.
Um, or like binge eating, like I mentioned, or feeling like that out of control feeling around food. Like if I start eating this food, I know I won't be able to stop. And like
Mhm.
it goes along with your mindset too. It's not just the physical pieces at that point.
Right, right. Is it true? So I just when you were as you were talking, it triggered something that so if we put off eating when our body is telling us that we need it,
Yep.
right? So you're feeling hungry, but you're not going to eat. Is it true? Um, and I don't mean to put you on the spot,
That's okay. We
but
didn't
it
talk
just
about
triggered
this,
this.
I guess.
Sorry about I know. Um, is it true that then so if you could do that consistently enough, where you push the hunger away and you don't give your body what it needs at the time, over time it starts holding on to more like kind of and you so that you build up more of like a fat reserve because your body's like, well, I'm not getting what I need when I need it, so I need a reserve to pull off from when I need it for energy. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I think mostly yes. And again, I haven't delved super far into like the research a lot lately to be able to answer like super confidently, but and I feel like people's bodies act differently too. So people with different eating um stuff, like some people if they're ignoring hunger and they're restricting a lot, some people do just lose a ton of weight. Some people experience a lot of weight loss up front and then we hit that plateau, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like that's where that piece that Carrie's just talking about comes in. Like, um, our body's like, hey, wait a second. What is happening? Because our body also doesn't really know the difference between, hey, we're doing this on purpose and oh my gosh, we're starving to death.
Right.
And so it has so many things in place to prevent us from starving.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's where the piece that Carrie's talking about sort of fits in. Like our metabolism slows down at that point too. And so, yes, we need less food and calories or energy or however you want to talk about it
Mhm.
to handle our daily body functions. And at some point, yeah, things are going to slow down. We're probably going to try to hold on to everything we can.
Mhm.
So we do have that reserve. Is that
So
an-
ironically, the body does the opposite of what you actually
yes,
trying to accomplish and think that you're
exactly.
doing. Because
Yep.
the other part of that too, like when you said, if you even if you lose weight, a lot of that is muscle mass. It's not even, fat loss.
Mhm.
It's muscle. And so really that's not even what you're trying to accomplish. Is
Right.
so it kind of works it's doing the opposite than
It
what you
really is, and remember that muscle is like living tissue and part of
want.
that metabolism that we were just talking about, and so if we're not eating enough to support holding on to our muscles, then our whole body is taking a hit kind of with,
Mhm.
like, how much it can handle as far as food, energy, exercise, and all of that,
Right, right.
and not to forget too that our organs, a lot of them are muscles too,
Mm,
um, so like, our bowels tend to slow down when we're losing a lot of muscle mass, so constipation's a really, big symptom, I guess, of weight loss and muscle loss.
mhm. Yeah, and there's all kinds of things that come along with it when we're not, um, nourishing our bodies and nurturing our bodies,
Mhm.
and providing what they need to run efficiently and run their best,
Right.
which is why we're doing this.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of us and I feel like I just mentioned this in one of our other episodes, but I'm gonna say it again because it's worth saying 100,000,000 times, but I feel like a lot of things that a lot of us experience on a regular basis, like chronic fatigue or just low energy,
Mhm.
brain fog sometimes. It's like all of that tends to also be signs of undernourishing. And I feel like a lot of times we don't take into consideration the food aspect of it.
Yes.
And so it's like, okay, well, if you have low energy all the time, let's look at everything. Like Carrie and I always say, like, what does everything look like for you? Like your sleep, your stress, your social connections, your activity, your nutrition, all of it. Um, but I feel like food often goes underlooked, or maybe it gets flipped into the opposite. Like, oh, what foods should we take away if you're eating like higher sugar, higher processed foods? We feel like those might contribute to this low energy, so let's just take those away, which tanks your
Yeah,
intake even
instead of
more.
what can we add to
Right, right,
help give you
and
more energy,
that's
more
the
lasting
lens.
energy.
Yeah, that's the lens I come from with all of my clients that I work with is instead of taking things away, because that just triggers this restriction mindset that we're talking about, what can we add in to help you meet your goals, whatever they may be?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. And even like if you're not eating enough and getting enough nutrients, sometimes like it'll show up like your hair will fall out more.
Mhm.
Maybe your nails aren't as healthy, your skin's not as healthy. There's different signs. Um and like you said, it's so often you don't consider your nourishment and what you're giving your body.
Right. Or
Um
maybe not like the full picture, like, not just, "What am I eating?" Or maybe people are thinking, "It must be what I'm eating or what I'm not eating," instead of, "Am I eating enough?"
mm,
I think those are 2 different mindsets around food because I feel like we're all or most of us are striving to just eat less all of the time because somehow that has gotten into this, like, self-worth
mm.
situation where if I'm quote unquote good and I eat less, then I'm a better person. Like it's just got into this weird
Oh, I
spot.
had yeah, and I had that when I,
Mhm.
was anorexic.
Right.
I actually when I was in high school, I worked at a restaurant and, the owners, they knew something was going on. They're like, let us make you, we're gonna make you a sandwich or whatever. I'm like, no, 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 I don't. And I always, or even like serving the food to people in
Mhm.
my mind at the time, I'm like, I am stronger and better than you
Mhm.
because I can resist this. I don't
Right.
need it, right?
Yeah.
While I was withering away and
Mhm.
in a horrible place. But you get into that twisted mindset. It's very easy. You don't have to have an eating disorder to get into that mindset.
For sure.
It can just be, you're out with girlfriends and it's like, "Huh, I don't need a burger. I'm just gonna have a side salad, thanks,
Right.
and a
Yeah.
diet soda, um, until you get home and are starving.
Right. And I
Which,
feel like again, a lot of these and we talked about this in the last one, episode 27 about rejecting the diet mentality. We talked a lot about a lot of these behaviors that Carrie was just mentioning have become very normalized. So
mhm,
many people do this. And at the same time, it's not necessarily healthy for our bodies,
right.
which is so backwards. Like
It
trying to
sure
eat
is.
less, we feel like is better, but at the same
Mhm,
time, it's actually not good for our bodies.
right. Like if you don't have the energy that you need to do the activities that you want, you gotta take a look, like, and yes, it's everything,
Mhm.
but also if you're going to bed really hungry, you might not sleep as well,
Yeah.
right? Like it's all connected. Or if you eat too much too soon to bed, close to bedtime, you also might not sleep as
Right.
well. And it's
Exactly.
figuring out where are you at, and this is gonna be different for everyone, but taking that honest assessment.
Mhm. For sure.
Um, so what are some signs you talked about different signs of hunger?
Mhm.
Um, what do those include? I mean, obviously people think hunger, that grumbling stomach, right?
Right.
I
Yeah.
always think
So,
I always think of Pooh Bear, the
oh,
rumbly and the
yeah.
tumbly.
That's so funny. That's so funny. I love it. That's a great, great one. So yeah, definitely that can be one. Um, but I'd also like to add too, the more we ignore or avoid or misconstrue or whatever our hunger signals, the quieter they become over time.
Hmm,
So somebody might never feel anything in their stomach about hunger or anything over time.
Right.
So that's where a lot of these other ones come in. And again, like Carrie said, it's very personalized. And sometimes we also don't notice them. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that too. But other signs of hunger, so different stomach feelings, that's definitely one. Um, my go-to in my body is irritability,
Mm,
the
yes.
hangry feeling.
Angry.
Hangry, oh man. Yep. And then fatigue or the low energy,
Mhm.
poor focus, so like foggy, brain fog, poor concentration. Headaches is another one that I've seen a lot of people that I've worked with um, figure out is a hunger signal for them.
Yep.
Um,
Anxiety.
Anxiety, yep, poor
Mhm.
mood is all attached to this. Shakiness, like that low blood sugar feeling, if you've ever had that. And again, sometimes you might pick up on the fact that, oh man, I haven't eaten in a while and I'm starting to feel that shaky lightheadedness.
Yeah.
So I know I need to eat, but other people might not get there. Or another piece of it is we might have like a spectrum of feelings over time. Like it might start with a stomach grumbling, but you're busy in a meeting and so you can't get to it. And then it gets worse. Sometimes people actually feel more nauseous when they're really hungry, if they've ignored the stomach grumbling. And then they progress into like the headache, the lightheadedness, the shakiness. Other people, if we've been ignoring hunger signals for a long time, they tend to not be able to hear those quieter signals, or maybe the signals aren't there anymore, and they tend to jump to these more extreme ones, like a really bad headache, or that
Mhm.
low energy all the time, or that, like, brain fog. We tend to kind of skip those lower level ones and go to more, like, extreme, in my eyes, I guess, hunger signals. And then we might not relate it to hunger. It's just, "Oh, I have a headache, and I don't know why."
Right. Yeah. Sometimes I get bloated when
Mm.
if I've gone too long without
Yep.
eating.
Yep, that's a
Um,
big one actually, mhm. Yep, I
so
forgot about that. So, a lot of times if we're skipping meals, if you tend to be on the spectrum of where you tend to bloat more than maybe other people, bloating does get worse if we skip meals.
yeah, yeah, awesome. Well, there's all of this reminds me of that study.
Mm.
Was it World War II?
2, I think, yes. I think it was in the 5th. Was it if it was World War II, it was in the 40s, but I feel like it was in the 50s? I don't know. It was somewhere around the 40s or 50s. It's this,
During wartime.
yeah, infamous, I guess, starvation study, right? The one
Hmm.
that's the one you're talking about.
Yes, this is
Um,
super interesting.
it's so interesting. So, I haven't looked at it actually in a while, so we'll give you the gist. They took a bunch of men that were not able to be drafted into the war for whatever reason, and they put them into this research study instead, I guess. And
And they were all
they
young, fit, healthy
yes,
men.
yes. Good to know for sure. So they put them into this research study and they put them on a restricted food plan, basically.
But 1,500 calories,
Yes, thank you for mentioning that.
which it is not like it was 900 calories or anything like that, like 1,500 calories,
Right.
which
Is, to be honest, for a lot of people that might be listening or have done dieting in the past, you guys probably have a better idea of what 1,500 calories looks like in a day than I do. But
mhm.
that's on the higher end, I feel like, for a lot of, like, restrictive type diet plans.
Yeah, 'cause I feel like a lot of them are like 1,200
Yeah,
calories.
yeah, and we're not
Um,
suggesting that, just keep a note. We don't
no.
really like to talk about calorie numbers on here, but for the sake of talking about the research study,
Mhm.
it's just interesting to put it into perspective.
So they restricted this group of young, healthy men to 1,500 calories a day,
Yeah.
and what
What
happened?
happened? Oh my gosh, it was wild. But oh, this is gonna be a funny, I apologize in advance, but I can't help myself.
Oh, boy.
What happened to them is wild, but we also see it out in the wild today. Um,
You explain
yeah,
yourself, Ashley.
I can't help it, I'm sorry. So, what happened? You guys are all, like, on the edge of your seats in suspense. What they found was when they restricted these guys, they had these obsessive thoughts about food all the time. People that never really like, especially men, I feel like in that time period, they didn't necessarily probably have to rely on themselves a lot for food. They
Right.
probably were getting it from if they were married or their families or, like most men around that time probably didn't have to rely on themselves for food most of the time, just based on gender roles and all that. But anyways, some of them could not stop talking about food, thinking about food. They would like write about food in their journals. Some of them even started like collecting recipes from magazines and whatnot, or talking about like cooking and things like that. Guys that had never been interested in doing any of that before. A couple of them actually got kicked out because they were found to be binge eating. Um, and
Yeah, some of them were hoarding foods and they wouldn't share
hoarding
it.
food. Yep. Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's so I mean, like you said, 1,500 calories is too low for,
Yes.
especially for
For
you
them.
know,
Yep.
young, healthy, active men. Um, but we do it when, when you're restricting yourself, it's the same idea that we
Exactly.
see.
Yep.
That
Even if
the
mhm.
food obsession, the constant thinking about food,
Or
the
talking about your diet
yes,
or
yawn.
your weight loss or the scale or whatever facet you're coming up with. It's just part of our brain's survival mechanism because what it's trying to do is get you to think about food and their hunger signals were probably heightened for a little bit and then lost over time a little bit. But in the beginning, your body ramps up your hunger signals because it's telling you to go find food.
Yes.
It says, "Please feed me." And then we're like, "No, no, we're not gonna do that." Or in the case
It's
of
like a
research yeah.
notification. You get a notification on your
Yeah.
phone, right?
Mhm.
It's notifying you like, "Hey, you got a message, you need to read it."
Yep.
That is those constant thoughts about food
Yep.
is your brain's way of saying, you're not giving us what we need.
Right.
So, here's your notification.
Right. And then when we ignore it or avoid it, it's like leaving it on red and
Mm,
never doing anything about it. And so what we're talking about more today is like that honoring piece of it, which means that you're gonna respond to it and
yes.
do something about it. Or like reflect in the moment about, I can't eat right this minute, so what's my plan going to be? Or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah, noticing it, like Ashley said, responding to it instead of just ignoring it or pushing it away.
Right.
Because even if you're not in a position where you could eat right then, um, what is your plan? When can you?
Right.
And knowing that, yes, it will, because that also helps calm the brain, right? Because the
Mhm.
brain wants to feel, um, you want to feel safe. So if there's like this, oh my gosh, I am freaking starving and I don't know when I'm going to get to eat again, that kind of triggers this anxious response.
Mhm.
And then you're going to think about it more.
Right.
If you have your backup plan
Right.
and you get,
Yeah, or even like what Carrie's mentioning is like responding to your hunger in the moment, but also if we're going even a step above, which we might not talk a lot about today, but we have talked about it in the past, is planning ahead for your hunger. And I
yes.
think we'll talk about that a little bit towards the end when we give you some more like concrete advice, but stay tuned, I guess.
All right. So there are different types of hunger.
Oh, there's so many. And you might not think about it, right? Like I I say this to clients all the time because we end up talking about hunger a lot, and one of my questions to them is always like, so this is a little bit kind of putting the last conversation together with this new question, but it's like, well, what does hunger feel like in your body?
Mm,
And who has ever asked anybody that before? It's such an interesting thing to think about. Um, but it shows up in a lot of different places, like the signs and symptoms of hunger, like we just talked about, but other things can sort of trigger that hunger also. So we talk about nose hunger. So If you're anywhere and somebody walks by with something that smells really good, French fries are a big one because
Mm.
they are very strong smelling and they smell
Or
really good.
or like a steak grilling
Yeah,
or
anything the grill
grilling.
if you drive by a restaurant and you could smell the grill smell or something, like, that's all nose hunger. It smells good to you, and it kinda triggers that, "Oh, that sounds good to me now," or
Hungry.
whatever. Yeah, I know, we're doing this around lunchtime today. Um, and then there's also eye hunger, which is similar. It's kind of using a different sense. So seeing something, so seeing advertisements or, if
Mm.
you're trying to figure out what you want on the menu, all the pictures if you're out are on the menu or somebody else's plate walks by.
Or slowly strolling through the bakery section at the grocery store.
Yes. And that puts together a couple different of them too, right? The nose
Right.
and the
Yeah,
eye.
if they're baking, oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
You guys, I hope you're all hungry now and go find a treat. And then there's also, um, the next 2 are sort of similar. There's stomach hunger, which is sort of what we were just talking about, like feeling hunger in your belly, so the grumbling tummy, um, which is one of the signals telling you that your body needs some fuel. But there's also what's called cellular hunger, which is kind of interesting to think about. It's like your body's basic layer
Mhm.
sending signals that you need something. Whether it's fuel in general or, sometimes we're craving certain things and we don't know why. And maybe it's your body telling you you need the nutrition from that food. So the stomach and the cellular are similar because they're
Mhm.
both signals from your body.
And the cellular, so if you didn't know already, like your cells require energy.
Every one of them.
So there's all these little energy
Factory.
processes, huh?
Factories.
Factories?
Yeah.
Yes, going on in every cell in your body. And it's where the all the chemicals are produced and used at the cellular
Yep.
level. So it's really like this deeper. You have to nourish your body for it to work properly. And we don't think. I think what's really cool about the cell. I have a really hard time saying that word cellular.
Good
Um,
work.
the cellular level is that, and you see more and more of this too, of with different um techniques with energy stuff at the cellular level. um but it's cool because it's at that very basic, the foundation of your body. um and it you have to nourish that and give the cells what they need to work properly.
Yep.
um so
Yeah.
yeah.
And I
Eat.
feel like we don't think of that, like I feel like when we think about food, we think about calories immediately and how they're going to affect our weight, and it's so much more than that, but that's what it has sort of, like, gotten down to, and our body needs so much to run appropriately because our bodies are so cool. They
They
do
are.
so much, like,
Mhm.
under the surface, right? Like, we can't even we're still learning about it all, which is so cool.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, anyways, we talk about that another whole time, but we won't. Um, then,
What other type of hunger?
we're on heart, I think.
Mhm.
Um, so heart hunger is like, well, I'll let Carrie do this one actually, because I know that Carrie has a very special heart hunger example.
So heart hunger is more of that. It's not, well, let's explain emotional hunger first. What
Okay,
So emotional hunger is you're eating due to an emotion.
right,
Like you feel stressed or ticked off, so you eat to try to feel better,
right.
basically, right? And sort of try to numb that
Mhm,
feeling. Versus heart hunger is more, you have an emotional connection to a food. So for me, like for instance, at the holidays, there are certain dishes, well, really throughout the year, but like at the holidays, I make my grandmother's cutout cookies.
mhm,
There's a couple other um recipes like throughout the year, whether if we're cooking out, I make her calico beans. Like there's that connection, or even like well, it can happen with the smell too. Like,
Yep.
ooh, that smells like my grams. Like,
Right.
right. And you get that. So there can be some overlap with some of these types of hunger also.
Yeah.
Um, so it's that you have an emotional connection to a recipe or a certain dish, or even like a certain smell,
Mhm.
if like my grandmother's always she was always baking and cooking. They were
Yep.
farmers and they always had that going. So certain smells trigger that memory. It's like, ooh, now I want that,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because then I feel more connected to my grandmother,
Exactly.
and family,
Yep.
and those memories.
Mhm. And so, yeah, they certainly overlap, but they are a little bit different because we're thinking more about how those dishes, um, remind you of your family members or whomever, as
Mhm.
opposed to, like, using food as a coping mechanism with the emotional eating, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright. And then we have, mind hunger, which is really interesting. I feel like this one is what a lot of us deal with a lot. It's sort of those food rules or the things that you think about in your head when you're trying to make a food choice, like, "Should I eat this?" And then all those things that you think pop up, like, "No, because of XYZ," or "I read that this is a bad food," or, "It's not allowed on my diet plan," or whatever
Yeah.
comes up
Whatever
for you.
rule you've made
Yeah.
up for yourself.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And also there's mouth hunger,
Yes. Oh,
which
I
is
skipped that one. Thank you, Carrie.
when you want either a certain taste or a certain texture.
Mhm.
So maybe you really want something that's crunchy, right? And all you have is pudding.
Right, it's not gonna cut it.
You're not gonna feel satisfied.
Right.
So in that kind of thing, either the taste or the texture would be also the mouth hunger.
Yes. Yep. And then the last one we have is my personal favorite, practical hunger. And this
Oh,
I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but it's kind of like we can't follow every hunger signal that we might get all day long,
right.
probably, because we all have other stuff going on. We are very busy in our lives, most of us right now, and practical hunger allows us to still honor our hunger most of the time. It just is going to fit into our day a little better. So, for example, if you typically eat lunch at noon and you get scheduled a work meeting at noon, maybe we'll have a snack a little bit earlier, or maybe we'll move our lunch to 11:30 so we can go into our meeting more well fed, or if we're allowed to eat lunch in the meeting, we could ask about that. Or maybe if we have the snack before the meeting, we can move our lunch to after the meeting. So it's all about realizing when you're typically hungry, I guess, and making accommodations to still sort of fit that in, even if it might not look quote unquote like perfect for your body, every time.
Right, because and that's the point. There is no one perfect way
Right.
to eat it, and we do live in the real world. So while
Mhm.
it would be awesome if you could just, you figured out all your hunger cues and you could, nourish your body when, you feel that and it's all, but that's not how the real world always works. And you
Right,
might have
right.
days where you could do that or
Mhm.
certain times, but um yeah, the practical hunger. I can see why that's your favorite because
Yeah,
that's like the day to day, like this out and getting it done and making it work with your life.
right. Because I feel like a lot of times too, people are like, especially with intuitive eating, we might misconstrue it as eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full, or
Mhm,
even just some people have that belief in their mind, and it's like, "Well, what happens when I can't eat when I'm hungry? Then I just won't," or
mhm.
we get a little anxiety about it or don't know how to handle it, and this
Right.
is how we handle it with that practical hunger, like, if we normally eat dinner at 5, but we have sports all night till 8 or something,
Mhm.
how the heck? And so instead of just not having a plan and everyone getting hangry, especially your athletes. Like,
Hmm.
that's not a fun
Yeah.
time. They're gonna
Yeah.
not
Well, they need to be nourished, right? To have the
Yep,
energy and the strength to get
exactly.
through sport.
Yep, so if you say, "Oh, well, one of the kids gonna eat because they need to eat because the game," you have to include yourself in there too. Like,
Right. Right.
if you're skipping dinner at 5 too, so is it eating dinner earlier and having a bedtime snack or snack on the ride home if they're hungry? Or is it having a bigger snack before the sporting event or activity or whatever it might be, and then dinner later? Or, that's totally
Sure.
up to everyone to figure out what works best for you and your families.
Yeah. And that's where meal planning comes in too, right?
It's all connected.
Whoop, whoop. Yeah. So if you know you've got a game that night and either eating out, it's not in the budget, or just you just don't want to do it, is there a crock pot meal that you
Mhm.
can put together, or something simple that's going to go together really quick and easy when you get home. So the planning out just takes a lot of the stress out of it.
Yes, it does. And that might be why it's my favorite too, because then I can talk about the meal plan part.
Miss Meal Planner.
I know it.
So, well, if you haven't heard yet, we have hunger blueprints.
Yes. And yes, and that's really helpful because it's tying in all the things that we're talking about. There's a download link for it in the show notes. And basically, what it is what we're going to talk about right now, talking about how to figure out. We're kind of shifting gears a little bit. We're going to talk about emotional hunger a little bit more and how
Mhm.
we can figure out whether we feel like eating because of emotional um, signals or cues or feelings, or whether it's more of that physical hunger or any of the other types of hunger that we mentioned.
Right,
So the hunger blueprint is kind of like a little roadmap to help you figure all that out.
right. And if you have been pushing hunger away and not paying attention for a long time, it's going to take some time to figure this out. So
Yes.
show yourself some compassion,
Mhm.
give yourself some slack and some grace, and know that, um, just know it's going to take some time, right? Because
Right.
if you've been ignoring these, they probably show up, but you push them away so much that you don't notice them anymore.
Mhm.
So once you start paying attention to them again, um, and it is going to be confusing, like, well, I don't know, is this like, right? Like it's going to take time.
Yes.
So just, like I said, show yourself some grace and give yourself the time to figure it out. It's not a perfect system or one way to do it or anything like
Right.
that. So, but you got to slow down enough to do it.
Exactly, and I think that what we're talking about now with, like, how to figure this out, it's sort of flowing into the second phase of the intuitive eating that we talk about, getting to know your body. So,
Mm,
honoring your hunger is a kind of 2 different things almost. It's like letting go of some of the things, like we talked about in rejecting the diet mentality, about why you might be avoiding your hunger or ignoring your hunger, like letting go of some of that, and then also learning your body again, like getting to know your body. So slowing down, paying attention, figuring out what does hunger feel like in your body? When does it usually happen? Like figuring out your patterns. I think that is probably the biggest takeaway from this one is figuring out your patterns of hunger so that you can then respond.
yes, because patterns is huge, and not just for eating, but it's like we all have patterns in everything that we do.
Yes. Yes.
So when you can figure out your patterns and see how you are either reacting or responding to them or not,
Right.
then that's like a really that's key to a lot of things.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of times we don't put them together. So, like, I'll give a couple examples. I've had clients who report to me that they have headaches like mid to late morning every
Mhm.
day and they have no idea why. And after we talk about it for a while, we figure out oh, we're skipping breakfast. So I wonder, right? Just curiosity. That's
Right.
all it is. I wonder if those are actually your hunger signals. So maybe let's try adding something in to your morning and see how that goes.
Right.
And for a few people, that was definitely what was happening.
Mhm.
Other people have experienced like this really high level of food cravings, and eating past comfortable fullness kind of cycles in the evening.
Mhm.
And we have to remember that what's happening during one part of the day is likely coming from what's happening in the other part of the day. So if we're
Mm.
not eating a lot during the day, our body's gonna figure that out because it's pretty smart, unfortunately, sometimes. It kinda makes us crazy. Um, but we have to say, "Oh, well, if I'm feeling this strong of an urge to eat so much at night, maybe I'm not eating enough during the day." Like, that happens
I
a
think that's
lot.
very common, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
very common.
People and, if you work, like, in an office setting, for example, I've seen this before, um, that it's almost like this competition to see who can eat the least amount of food during the day at work,
Yep,
right?
or we skip lunch or
Mhm, because
right.
you're a stronger, better person if you do that.
Yep, and we have to work through our lunch, so why
Mhm.
bother eating? Like, there's so many different pieces
Yes,
to it.
different scenarios, and and then when you get home, you're starving because and of course you're going to be.
Mhm,
And it has nothing to do with willpower or you being a bad person or anything. It's just
right,
your body's way, it's your biology. But like, hello, we're running on fumes here.
right.
So feed me.
Mhm, exactly.
Yeah, it's
Yeah. S
so what are some practical ways
Mhm.
that someone could start tapping into that their body wisdom and figuring out those feelings
Yeah.
of hunger?
So figuring out your hunger signals and, like, your patterns, that's a great
Mhm.
question. So, like Carrie said a few minutes ago, slow down a little bit and
Mm,
check back into your body. Like, I feel like most of us just live in our brain, and that's about it. We often don't check in with our bodies or pay attention to
mm,
them that much unless it's like a really strong signal of pain or other things. So tuning back into your body a little bit. And we can do that by doing like little mindfulness exercises or giving yourself like 1 or 2 minutes to just sit and be in your body. A
mm,
great way to do that is what um, is called a body scan. So you kind of just sit down quietly, close your eyes
mhm.
if you want to, and kind of just check in with all the parts of your body and see what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, just kinda start I like to start at the top of my head, and I just slowly go down, how and you can do it combine it with, like, total relaxation too, just
Yep.
kinda release your muscles as you're doing it and, see how your body's really feeling because you can't it's hard like when you're just go 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 right and you don't stop long enough to pay attention to what is actually going on all of a sudden you kind of hit that wall and it's like oh I don't have any energy and oh I just want to lay down and take a nap or
Mhm.
oh I can't focus and oh I got a headache or whatever um but sitting down and just taking a few minutes to breathe and check in with your body and
Figure out what it needs, maybe.
Yeah.
And it,
Sometimes I like put one hand on your heart and one on your belly and just kinda like sit for a minute with it like, "Hey, you know, I
yeah,
got you."
yeah. And that doing this in the beginning, it might take a little longer to like just get the lay of the land and get more familiar with
And
how
it
to do
also
it.
might feel uncomfortable and
Yes.
weird
Yep. And
if you're not
also
used to doing this.
yeah, and also I feel like it's gonna end up preventing a lot of the stuff Carrie was just saying. Like, if we're checking in with our body more, we might not get to that burnout point
Mm,
as much, hopefully.
yeah. Yeah, and also, once you get used to doing it and you start noticing the signals, it comes easier.
Yep. Or,
Uh,
even, um, so another way to kind of think about hunger signals is like maybe even set a little mental reminder for yourself, like every hour, check in, like, do I have a headache? How's my belly? Um, or if you know what some of your typical hunger signals are, if there's some of the more extreme ones that we talked about, trying to be a little bit more quiet about other things to see if you can pick up on, does my stomach rumble and I just miss it? Or is being, a little bit or having a little bit less concentration happen before a headache or, like figuring that out. And does it happen at a certain time of day? And if that's the case, well, we definitely need to eat before then, not at that time, but before then.
and also making sure that you're staying well hydrated. Um, because I think that that also just kind of helps smooth things out some.
Mhm.
Also
Right.
when
And
you're and it's one of the top reasons for a headache too.
yeah. And also remembering that fluids are not a replacement for food.
Right.
So if you are feeling hungry, drinking water definitely fills up the stomach and might curb the signals for a little bit,
Mhm.
but our bodies are smarter than that, and they're gonna realize that you actually didn't give them any fuel.
Right.
So keep that in mind.
Yes. Very good point. Um, what else? Like consistently practice it, right?
Yeah,
Like we've already said, show yourself some grace and give yourself time to sort of relearn your body.
yeah.
Get to know it. I want to break out in song right now. Getting to know you. Getting to
Perfect.
know all about you. Sorry, I wanted to do that before when you said getting to know your body. I'm like, oh, hold back, Carrie, hold back. But I couldn't that time. So.
Okay. And remember, and like we talked about, the principle number 2, the honoring your hunger, is a little bit of 2 different phases, like we talked about. Like, it's letting go of the things that are keeping you stuck in the diet mentality,
Mhm.
and it's getting
Like what? Like
like the
getting
mind hunger we talked about. Mhm.
yeah, getting off social media accounts that make you feel bad about yourself,
Yeah. And
and
just
like that.
realizing that hunger is here for a reason.
Mm.
I
Yeah, it's
think
not just to, like, torture you or something.
right. And I
It's
think
not and you're not weak for feeling hungry.
no, so
I think that's key, right?
if that's the place you need to start, like, with an affirmation or something, like,
Mm,
"My hunger is trying to just keep me nourished," or
mm.
however you wanna think about that in a more positive way.
Right, and if you go deeper and learn that it's actually emotional hunger that you're
Mhm.
experiencing, that's another animal altogether,
Right,
right? Like, because that you don't necessarily want to nourish with food.
right.
Um, that's other types of nourishment.
Right, and
So,
we'll talk way more about that. I think we are gonna do another whole episode at some point,
mhm,
so stay tuned
yeah,
for that also.
yeah.
And Carrie mentioned doing, like, an honest assessment of things and how you're dealing with hunger and, um, checking in with your feelings and stuff and seeing, am I using food this way as a coping tool? And then moving through that again, we'll talk way more about that in another episode, but just figuring it out for this part,
Yes. Yeah. Start noticing.
noticing it.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. Awesome. Anything else?
I think that's a lot.
Did you get all that?
I don't know. If you
Um,
wanna listen to it twice, please do. It's a lot of information.
or if you have questions like, I don't get what you're saying here, or what about this? Please feel free to contact us.
Yes,
Um,
and you can find our social links in our show notes. We're on Instagram and Facebook, and we have a fun Facebook group. We have emails also, which I
or
think
join the Pod Squad because that's
yes,
a
Pod
great
Squad.
place to come and get one-on-one attention with us.
Yep, yep. So that meets the first Tuesday of every month at noon via Zoom. And I believe the link to learn more about that is in our show notes also. But yeah, like Carrie said, basically how the group runs is we talk about the podcast episodes that we just covered in the last couple weeks. But also we tend to take listener questions and run with those too. So like Carrie said, it's a good place for like a little bit more one-on-one. It's a very small group setting. Um, and they don't air on the podcast, so it's a private thing.
Yes. Yes. Awesome. This is awesome, as
And we'll
usual.
chat with you next time.
Yes, ma'am. Love your latte.
Love you, latte.